week 5 of the fantasy football season. Here's top 15 tight ends I'm ranking this week. So right now, tight end we know has been one of the worst positions in fantasy football. And right here, the last few weeks, even the elite guys that people thought coming into the year really haven't been putting points up. We've seen Darren Waller struggle, Dallas Goedert struggle this season. We even seen George Kittle not do much as well. So right now, going into the week, here's the top 15 guys. Number 1, Travis Kelce of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Travis Kelce, we know he missed week 1 this season, but besides that, he's gone out there and he put up 44 fantasy points in PPR leagues the last few weeks. So right now, him and Patrick Mahomes, obviously one of the deadliest combinations in all pro football. And this week here with a good matchup and a potential shootout versus the Minnesota Vikings that don't stop anyone this year. I got Kelce at 1, number 2, Mark Andrews of the Baltimore Ravens. So Mark Andrews, a nice ball game last week, scoring 2 touchdowns. And this is what this Raven team needs more of, getting the ball to Mark Andrews. The first few games of the year, he really wasn't getting much of it. But this week here in a division matchup at the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think Andrews, once again, he can make plays in the middle of the field. He can make plays in the seam. And Lamar's just got to get the ball to him a little bit more. So this week, with all those factors, and I think Baltimore once again having good field position like they did last week, with a bunch of backups most likely being in there with Pittsburgh, either Trubisky or Pickett, Freiermuth and Deontay Johnson already out. I think Andrews with a short field and the game plan last week we see the Ravens go with, and I got him at 2, number 3, TJ Hawkinson of the Minnesota Vikings. So him and Kirk Cousins, they've had great chemistry so far since Hawkinson got dealt here to this Viking team at the trade deadline last season. So Hawkinson, he goes out there and make plays. And this week here, they know they got to put up a lot of points on the board, is this Viking team, if they want to pull off the upset versus the Kansas City Chiefs. So right now, this Chief defense in middle of the pack type of D, but I don't think many people could cover TJ Hawkinson. So this week, after a poor game last week, surprisingly in a good matchup versus the Panthers, I got Hawkinson as a bounce back, and I got him at 3, number 4, Sam Laporta of the Detroit Lions. So Laporta, he came out of nowhere for the most part this season. The guy was drafted 13th, 15th round, or not even drafted at all in some fantasy leagues this season, but right now one of the top tight ends in all fantasy football. So this week here, good matchup versus the Carolina Panthers, where we know they don't really make stops, and he's the number 2 option in this passing game right now is Laporta, behind Amon-Ra St. Brown. I know Reynolds, he's had some good games as well, but Laporta is definitely the number 2 option, and more help might be on the way where it could open the middle of the field with the deep threat Jameson Williams possibly coming back in week 5 here, even though most likely he'll be on a snap count if he does play in this game. So right now, if Williams go up in the middle of the field for Laporta, that'll be more work for him to make plays. And this week, in a home game versus Carolina, I think he rolls with a good one at 4, number 5, Evan Ingram of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Evan Ingram, he's been solid once again this season, one of the only bright spots in the passing game here for Jacksonville. Calvin Ridley, he really hasn't done much this season. I know Christian Kirk's had a few decent games as well, but Evan Ingram, pretty much number 2 option on this offense here for this Jacksonville Jaguar team. So him and Lawrence, towards the end of last season, had a good rapport. And Evan Ingram, he's one of the most athletic tight ends in the league as well. He's pretty quick. He can run all the routes. He can work the middle of the field. Could even line up as a receiver on the outside if you need him to. And this week in a game at Buffalo in London, where I think they're going to be trailing early and often and have to throw the football a whole ton, I think Ingram puts in another good performance. At number 5, number 6, Jake Ferguson at Dallas Cowboys. So Ferguson, he's been putting up points, and he's been consistent so far this season, getting a lot of targets as well, where after Dalton Schultz left in free agency to Houston, this Cowboy team, they really weren't concerned Schultz left. They knew they had Ferguson as the backup tight end, and he could go out there and make plays. So Ferguson, last week a big game, 7 catches, 77 yards, and that's a huge performance, especially the landscape of the tight end this season. To get 14.5 fantasy points for a tight end is a big number. So this week here, in a matchup versus the 49ers, where I think this Cowboy team, they're going to play a little conservative and a lot of short routes and a lot of PA boots to the tight end position. I think Ferguson, once again, has a solid week. And I got him at 6, number 7, Darren Waller of the New York Giants. So Waller so far has been a disappointment, in my opinion, for this Giant team. He had one good game in week 2 versus Arizona, and the rest of the games were mid to poor performances. So last week was a throw-it-out type of game for this New York Giant team, where Daniel Jones had no time. He was under pressure left and right. After snapping the football, there was a guy in his face at all times, it pretty much seems. So this week here, they got to adjust this offensive line. draw up some plays here for Darren Waller, because we know he's an athletic tight end. We know he's a big target. And this week here, I think they can make some plays in Miami. This defense isn't all that great over there in Miami, even though if Jalen Ramsey does come back, it definitely could be a huge addition, obviously, right away, even if he's not 100%. But right now, I think Waller and this Giant team, after the embarrassment loss on Monday Night Football, turned things around a little bit in terms of getting him the football. And I think he could be decent at 7. Number 8, George Kittle of the San Francisco 49ers. So George Kittle, we know, has been one of the better tight ends over the last few seasons. But this season, he really hasn't done much besides that Week 3 game versus the Giants. 7 catches, 90 yards. The rest of the year, he's only scored 12 fantasy points. So right now, Kittle's struggling, no doubt about it. But this week versus a team in the Cowboys where he's had good success and their linebacking crew isn't all that great, I think Purdy's going to lean on him a little more in this one. And it wouldn't be surprising to me if we see Kittle score his first touchdown this season, because like I said, the Cowboys are going to be focused more on Debo, Cowboys number throughout his career, and Brandon Ayuk, who's really emerging as one of the better number 2 wide receivers in the league. So this week here, I think Kittle flies under the radar and a lot of people aren't big on him. Has a good game. Number 9, Tyler Higbee of the Los Angeles Rams. So Tyler Higbee, he's been a consistent tight end the last few seasons for this Los Angeles Ram team of Matthew Stafford. So Cooper Kupp might be back in this game. And obviously the workload and target share could go down a little bit here for Higbee, but also could open up the field as well, where defenses, they got a game plan for Cooper Kupp and obviously Puka Nacua, which is some combination, in my opinion, in terms of guys who can run all the routes, can make those possession receiver type of plays. And this week here versus Philly, it's going to be a ball game anywhere, where I think this Ram team's going to throw a whole lot. And Tyler Higbee, I think, has a decent one. Number 10, Cole Kmet of the Chicago Bears. So Cole Kmet, he's been one of the better tight ends this season, surprisingly. Top 3 in fantasy points in PPR leagues, believe it is Cole Kmet. I know last week he exploded for 27 fantasy points, which was a huge game, and got majority of his points in one game. But this week he in a pretty decent matchup versus the Washington Commanders that aren't all that great on defense, and we've seen tight ends have some decent ball games. I think Cole Kmet could go out there and he could get 7-8 fantasy points at worst. And that's pretty much been his floor here for Cole Kmet. Only one bad game under 7 fantasy points. The rest, 7 or more fantasy points. So this week here, in a matchup on Thursday Night Football where it could be high scoring versus the Commanders, I got him at 10. Number 11, Hunter Henry of the New England Patriots. So Hunter Henry's been pretty solid so far for this New England Patriot team. He's a tight end that can make the plays at the goal line, especially. The first 2 weeks he had 50-plus yards and a touchdown. And this week he in a grinded-out type of game with 2 similar teams going at it, with the Saints coming to town here in New England. I think Hunter Henry has a good ball game once again, and he's one of Mac Jones' favorite targets, because Juju Smith-Schuster hasn't done much, Devontae Parker hasn't done much, and Kendrick Bourne hasn't done much as well. So right now, pretty much, Henry is operating, it seems like this season, pretty much as the 1 or 1A target in the passing game. So this week with a good matchup versus the Saints, I got him at 11. Number 12, Zach Ertz of the Arizona Cardinals. So Zach Ertz came back quickly from the offseason ACL injury, and he started week 1, and so far he's had 7 or more fantasy points in each and every game this year, except 1 so far. So Zach Ertz, we know he's a good route runner. We know he's got a good IQ, and this week I think he could take advantage of a mediocre to poor Cincinnati Bengal team. So right now, Zach Ertz, he could go out there and make some plays for Arizona. And Joshua Dobbs and him have a good rapport. So Dobbs, he's playing good football. Some guys who have emerged in this passing game, Hollywood Brown and Michael Wilson. And Ertz could just work the middle of the field and make his plays. So this week he's at 12. Number 13, Dallas Goedert of the Philadelphia Eagles. So Dallas Goedert, I had high hopes for him coming into the season. But right now, a lot of mouths to feed over there in Philly. They got a great running game with DeAndre Swift, Kenneth Gainwell. You got A.J. Brown, who had an argument with Hurts a few weeks ago, and ever since then, he's gone off with some monster fantasy performances. And right now, Dallas Goedert, the targets haven't been there. I know the route participation has been there, running tons of routes, 86% of the time. And the matchups there as well at the Rams, an indoor game, and they're soft in the middle of the field on their defense. But anyway, Dallas Goedert, I just really can't trust him this week here. Even though, like I said, some of these guys you just got to throw out there each and every week, because tight end, besides the top 4 or 5 guys, hasn't been a position of strength at all this season. Number 14, Tyler Conklin of the New York Jets. So Tyler Conklin's an under-the-radar tight end, available in over 90% of fantasy leagues. So him and Zach Wilson, even last season, we saw Conklin have some good games. And this year, he's had 2 games over 9 fantasy points. So right now, this week in a matchup at the Denver Broncos that don't cover the tight end pretty well. I think Tyler Conklin could go out there and be a pretty decent option for fantasy owners. If they don't want to play a Dallas Goedert, let's say, they won't want to play a Kyle Pitts, he'll be there on your waiver wire still as Conklin. And this week here in a good matchup, like I said, at the Denver Broncos, and him and Zach Wilson having a good rapport, especially a young quarterback we know relies on the tight end position as security blanket. I got him at 14 and the 15th and final tight end I'm ranking this week, Dalton Schultz of the Houston Texans. So Dalton Schultz, he's been a pretty solid tight end over the last few seasons with the Cowboys. I know this year he hasn't found his way with the Texans, and he possibly was a product of the Cowboy system, I believe, over the last few seasons. But it was good to see him find the end zone for his first touchdown with the Texans. And this kid, CJ Stroud, he's really spreading the football out this season. Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Robert Woods. And now if he could get Dalton Schultz in the mix of things here in a pretty decent matchup at the Atlanta Falcons, I think Dalton Schultz could be a serviceable tight end this week. And we know Schultz, he can run routes. We know he can work the middle of the field. And with Nico Collins taking the top off of some defenses and the deep ball threat as well in Tank Dell, I think Schultz could work in this offense more and be decent once again. So that's the top 15 tight ends I'm ranking here for week 5 of the fantasy football season.